Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would answer one of the questions I got recently. Someone watched me doing my speed work, and they actually asked, hey, I started the conjugate method. I'm trying to do speed work, but I'm not weak at the lockout on my lifts, like I'm weak at the bottom of my bench. Should I use bands for speed work still? And to me, that's a bizarre question. And the reason I say that is that we don't base stuff like our speed work on our weak point training. Okay, if you're weak at the bottom of your bench, assuming that you're set up correctly, you probably need more pec, you need more lat. Why wouldn't you just do floor presses, dumbbell presses, camber bar bench? Maybe with lightweight, ultra wide or almost illegal wide bench. Again, with really lightweight. Why wouldn't you do that instead? Why wouldn't you do more lat work? You shouldn't change your speed work based upon that. And here's what people need to understand with bands. We don't use bands to increase a lockout. You're confusing bands with chains or bands with partials. And I'm not saying that chains are exclusively for lockout either. They're for a more natural strength curve. Okay? For a more natural strength curve with accommodating resistance. Because we're all stronger on most of these lifts at the top. The only reason we miss those lockouts is because we have to expend so much energy on other things getting there than maybe something like a weak muscle. But chains are a little bit different, but I don't generally have most of my lifters, unless they only have one barbell, do chains. Okay, and usually my guys who do chains are guys who don't have band setups, they don't have band pegs, right? And I would rather them use accommodating resistance than straight weight. So let's kind of come over to the point. You should always use accommodating resistance on speed work if you have the ability to do so. Now, what does that end up being? I have quite a few lifters who don't have the ability to use bands. They're just not set up for it. They've got home racks that maybe aren't bolted down. They don't have band pegs at their gym. They don't change, whatever. All right, fine. We do straight weight. I mean, I have a client who's like that, who has 5 different barbells. But because of his smaller rack and his inability to bolt it down right now in his home, he can't do band pegs, and because he's worried about flooring, he doesn't do chains. So we just rotate bars with straight weight. But generally speaking, you want to use bands. If you have, I'll make this very clear, if you have the ability to run bands, and you have 2 different barbells that you can use, I would prescribe bands for 100% of your speed work, all of it. Okay, you can just change bars. Look, if you have 2 different barbells you can squat with, just box squat against bands. For benching, I'm not even as worried. Look, if you only have 1 barbell, we can just rotate your 3 grips every week. I'm not even worried about running waves on your speed bench if that's the issue. I can keep you at a flat 50% bar weight, 30% band. So what's going on here? With bands aren't really stronger at the lockout than the mid-range. For the most part, it's very, very little difference. In other words, I'm running like on those speed squats above, I've got 130 pounds of bands on there. Do you guys honestly think the lockout is way harder than the middle? No, not really. So at the bottom, sure, I maybe only have 20 pounds of bands for the first inch. By that mid-range point right there, you see me at the mid-range, I'm probably well past 100 pounds already. Band tension accumulates very, very quickly. Your bands, usually if you start with your bands semi-tight, if you have them set up appropriately, by the time you're halfway through a rep, the band is at 90% tension. So if you're running 50% bar weight, 25% band weight, and that's percentages of your maxes, by the way. If your max is 400, then that's 200 pounds of plate weight and bar and 100 pounds of bands. I'll make it simple for you guys. And those bands are at 90% by the halfway mark. You don't have just 300 at the lockout and 200 at the bottom. What do you have? You have 300 at the lockout. You have like 290 by the halfway point. And you've got about 220 at the bottom. Okay, so your 300 pounds with bands with only 200 pounds of weight isn't just 200 at the bottom, 300 top. It's like 220 at the bottom. And it's 290 by the time you're halfway through the rep. It's a little tighter at the lockout than it is the halfway point if your bands are set up right. And what's the other thing that we're looking at? So if you're weak off the chest on the bench, why wouldn't bands increase your bench off the chest? You'll say, what? You're thinking in terms of mechanical stress on slow reps. Bands create an overspeed eccentric. And on speed bench, we're doing triples. There's an eccentric before every single rep, particularly the number 2 and 3. Okay, so let's say you run 9x3 with a lot of bands, like 30% band tension. That's a large overspeed response. What happens when you get to the bottom after the overspeed eccentric? You get a much stronger stretch reflex. Well, which muscles get the stretch reflex? The pectorals. Okay. On a bench press, the triceps get less activation on the eccentric and the pecs get more activation on the eccentric compared to the concentric rep. The overspeed eccentric forces the pecs to fire harder. And then when you hit the bottom and reverse it against the bands, because the bands have created an overspeed effect, you get a more intense pectoral recruitment where 1 inch off the chest. If you get a more intense pectoral recruitment 1 inch off the chest and you think in terms of muscle fibers and joint angle specificity, you're strengthening the muscle fibers of the chest that are related to getting the weight moving. Isn't that going to make you better off the chest and faster off the chest? Of course it will. You're inducing hypertrophy and changes, both neuromuscular and structural changes in the muscle right off the chest. Now, obviously, the heavier bands at the lockout will help with the lockout. So using that as an example, when you look at it from that perspective, why wouldn't you want to use bands if you're weak off the chest on your bench? You get a superior training response. That's kind of the whole point of speed work. Again, it's people thinking too linearly. They're thinking in terms of a non-dynamic model when they look at these things. And this is the problem. This is the reason people don't understand training programming. And this can be frustrating as a coach. This can be frustrating as an educator, is it how much people just simply do not understand. Stuff that should be easily grasped, but it's not because people don't always have the background to grasp it. Okay? Don't confuse moving really, really slow with chains with dynamic work against bands. Stop thinking mechanical and think dynamic. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.